Okay, as I mentioned, both Niraj and I are with Greater Portland Sustainability Education Network, which is actually uh, uh, it's one of, Niraja, you can catch me if I'm wrong on this. I think it's about 100 and almost 170 um, regional centers for expertise in education for sustainable development. And it's recognized by the UN University in, well, among other places in Tokyo. However, what we did this year as a product of, as an offshoot of a lot of things we do, was to organize a virtual bridge to COP25. And a little bit of background on that. I've personally been to a couple of COPs, COP23 and COP24. Came back, found there was lots and lots of online material that was being produced by UNFCCC, as well as lots of observer groups. That being said, I'd get back and talk to classes here and community groups in the Portland area and found that they knew very, very little about what went on. So thought, okay, how do we create virtual observers and really try to broaden engagement in the UNFCCC process? So with that in mind, okay, now where did my controls, oh, there we go. So with that in mind, there's essentially five, yeah, I think I can count this morning. Yeah, 5 different things that we want to talk about here. First of all, the challenges that led up to the virtual bridges. Second, what the virtual bridge concept is. Third, what the PDX or Portland virtual bridge look like. Some outcomes of the virtual bridge, of the PDX bridge, and then finally, and most importantly, questions and possibilities. So what I want to try to do, and I'm going to have, if folks can sort of help boost me along to make sure I don't ramble on too much. What I'm going to shoot for is trying to keep what Niraja and I have to say down to about 20 to 25 minutes. Because the big part of this is that we want to encourage some discussion about a couple of key issues, one of which is how to expand our own local bridge, but most importantly, how to encourage other communities to go out and do bridges, which is particularly important at a very critical time like right now. So some challenges to take a look at. First of all, starting with the obvious, we talked about climate disruption. It's a global issue having local consequences. To this crowd, I don't think I even need to say that. But what's important about that is that dealing with it requires an all hands and all minds and hearts on deck approach that requires participation from all segments of global society. An important lesson for us, my wife and I, when we went to COP24, was that was occurring at the same time that the Yellow Vest Revolution or rebellion was occurring in France, which was a case of, if you will, what would I call it? A well-intentioned climate initiative kind of gone awry. So there's that one issue of how do we, of the fact that we really do need to encourage on this global issue as many, many different parts of society and as many people as we can in the international process. The other part of things is, well, going to COP23 was a good example of this. Bonn is a city of 80,000. There were 35, I think about 35,000 people who descended on the city to attend the COP. And so that's a real major limitation. Many people were having to commute long distances to get there. And then, of course, there's always the issue which many climate deniers bring up as the hypocrisy of a lot of these events, which is the carbon footprint it takes to get there. And that's, I think, is something we need to take into account. Then we also have this year the fact that we've got events like the current pandemic that present some unique challenges and lessons, and I want to talk about those at the very end. And then, as I mentioned, there's this huge volume of online content. You can sit at home behind your computer and see what's going on at many of the UNFCCC events, but many people don't know anything about it. And there's also the fact that it gets a little boring to sit behind the computer by yourself watching recordings. So Virtual Bridge concept, basically what it is, local watch parties that enable local people to become virtual citizen observers. So there's some key aspects of that. First of all, being able to directly communicate with observers at the COPs and other international events. Second, to hear from local climate actors, to be able to make that link between what's happening at the international level and what's happening at the local level. Third down there is to communicate, is giving people an opportunity to communicate their ideas and concerns to UNFCCC staff and negotiators, which is really tricky because UNFCCC, like any other UN organization, is pretty bureaucratic. And then also, most importantly, just giving people the opportunity to network with people in their own community. So when we look at the PDX Virtual Bridge to COP25, just a couple of comments about who was involved. First of all, we had the three key organizers, which was Gibson, which provided the institutional umbrella for this effort. And then Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, or OMSI, and Lewis and Clark College, both were involved in the organizing team and also hosted events at their respective venues. We had a whole constellation of local partners that range from Oregon Audubon, or Portland Audubon Society, to the local chapter of Climate Reality, and so on. And most importantly, though, we were working in conjunction with two major international efforts, one of which was OpenCOP, a group that, well, there's a little, you can see off to the side here, their logo, and one of the key players in it was Citizens Climate, both Citizens Climate Education and Citizens Climate Lobby. Yes, there we go. And they were providing sort of the on the ground contact. Another group that we were involved with was Virtual Blue COP 25, which was definitely an international effort that was organizing panel discussions as well as reports from Madrid. And both groups were fantastic to work with and provided just an invaluable connection. So outcomes, in this point, I'm going to shut up and let Naraja take over. Go for it.
Yeah, so hello everyone. I want to continue from where Frank left off. And so couple of things when we think about outcomes, of course, what was outstanding were the conversations we had during the two hosted meetings and after. So I'm going to just get into the during the event story, which was we did something called the Talanoa dialogues. I think all of you are familiar with that. And what we did was basically use the three guiding questions of the Talanoa, and we we asked our audience, where are we, and where do you want to be, and what are the things we need to, in your vision, what are the things we have to do? What are your suggestions to be in that place? So basically the 3 Talanoa questions were reformatted for our local context, and we wanted to keep it simple. So we just said our Talanoa dialogue is going to ask for 2 things that concern you most about climate change. So we got our people into groups, and then they got these questions. So they said, each table came out and said, what are the 2 things that concerns most in regards to climate change? And the next question is, where do you want to be in 20 years? Of course, this sounds like, okay, I don't want to be here, I want to be somewhere else. And it was actually fun talking about this with our groups, and we got some interesting feedback on that too. So we kept this 20-year window as our future. Well, what are the things, how do you envision for our community? And the other thing was, what questions and suggestions do you have for the COP participants, and to get to that 20-year window? And based on all the feedback we got, I put together this document which is published on the Gibson website, and I'm just going to read a couple of highlights. For the first question, we'll share this document with you. If you're interested, you can look at it further. What are the 2 things that concern you the most? Most of the concern were obviously directly related to environmental concerns, climate anxiety, and the inability to grapple with a vision of food security being challenged, not having access to water and basic things we consider as basic human rights kind of thing. The other things were, of course, people were concerned about not having a defined linkage between the different things that lead to climate change, and not having a way to acknowledge these linkages, in an official way or through education, and of course lack of political leadership to affect change. And people did talk a lot about transitioning away from fossil fuels, zero emission economies. There are a couple of interesting how to do it type of sessions.
All right.
And then there were.
If you want, you can keep listening to Epic if you want.
Sorry, Anna. I think there's somebody who is unmuted. It sounds like Anna, but she looks like she's muted.
Okay. So can I continue now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the other thing was, of course, where people talked about communication. How do we communicate across divides? How do we communicate better and engage in this together? So there was that, and that again tied to informed leadership, individual and collective leadership for climate change. And that kind of leadership is what people are looking to transform through innovations and radical transformations. So those are the things that people recommended for the next 20 years, the vision. And some of the suggestions they had for COP were about investments. What kind of plans do the folks sitting in the COP, the decision makers, have in context of investment? What are the investment plans? How much do renewables get? What types of renewables get? What kinds of investment? How do we access, or how do we contribute to that process? And the other thing was, the one thing that struck me was, how people are very much in experiencing the climate change, as in me experiencing climate change versus us, our community experiencing climate change. And then there is the bigger thing, me versus us versus the others. People are trying to get a sense of, does it really matter if I make a little change in my lifestyle here in Portland? And if it does, how does it matter? And people are really looking to contribute from that space to a bigger space. They really want to see themselves as effective game changers, and they want to be part of that process. So these are the takeaways we got from our from the dialogue we hosted in both Lewis and Clark at the university and at OMSI. And there were children participating. There were like younger children who, you know, sat down and did some diagrams, which I think one of it you are going to see in that document. Apart from that outcome, this really reaffirmed to us that even though our effort was, we were literally barreling this effort because we had little time and we were really working hard to make this happen. It reaffirmed to us that this is what we need in our communities. There's a hunger to connect the local to the regional to the global. There is a hunger to contribute. There's a hunger to learn and to be part of the change. And I'd say one of the outcome for us, for the organizing committee, including Lewis and Clark and OMSI, was that fire, so to say, that made us think, okay, as soon as we are done with this, let's get on to the next one, and see how we can do better and how much more we can galvanize in our next virtual bridge. That's one thing. Frank, was there anything else for this slide? Or do you want to add anything here?
Nope, I think you covered the bases pretty well. Okay.
And so we move to the next one. Slide 7, what did the bridge to COP25 accomplish? And I basically ran over that material with you. And one of the things, the other accomplishment was, which I'd like to mention is, you know, the outreach to local partners. When we started putting out this, fanning out this umbrella or net, whatever, whichever way you want to look at it, and trying to understand who would onboard with us, we realized, because of obviously we were working at a short duration, as I mentioned, but for the next one, we do know we have local partners whom we will pursue. For example, the ecumenical ministries and other faith communities, and we will onboard more of educational institutions, for example, K-12, and this might be taking over in other places. And one of the things to mention at this point is also trying to expand this to the city level, city levels across the US. And I think those were a couple of things I wanted to mention in this slide, and we can move to the next.
Okay.
Oh, and Frank, I think I should also point out that as much as we accomplished, one of the things that we felt we were lacking also was communicating local concern to UNFCCC towards the leadership, as in we haven't still found the hook, as in within UNFCCC, who's the hook for, to whom we can communicate directly the summaries of what we find. And what does it mean for UNFCCC to receive such documentation from local level? I personally would think it should mean a lot. This is coming from civil societies, and it's a reflection of people's concern coming from the ground, and how we are able to harvest this energy, which we did in 2019 December, but effectively taking this upwards and asking people there in the decision-making platform, hey, this is what we are hearing on the ground, and what do you have in response to this? And how do you want to use this energy up there? I'm from the space of working with this, I feel fairly confident that we can find that conduit, and through multiple levels. But really, what would be helpful is to hear from all of you. You know, who are, if you know of examples of people we can contact within the bigger framework and see how we can channelize this kind of findings and get feedback back into our communities. That would be something I would like to leave with this slide. So Frank, we can move to the next one.
Yeah, I just did.
Okay, you want to go for the 8?
Sure.
Yeah.
So in terms of looking at what's next for the local, again, we've got 2 questions here. What's next for the local bridge? And then also, how do we begin to propagate this? In other words, get other communities to pick up the ball and form their own local bridges. And so for the local bridge, some of the things that Niraj has already talked about, expanding number of participants. And that means not only the number of participants, but the diversity of folks that were represented. I mean, we had, I would say that what we had represented was kind of the mainstay environmental groups that tend to appeal to middle-class folks that were involved. But we were lacking frontline community involvement. We really had some degree of involvement from faith communities, but not as much as I personally would like, because I've been involved with the Interfaith Coalition at previous COPs. And trying to figure out how to get businesses involved and youth groups involved. So that's one of our tasks here as far as the next one. So I mean, that's kind of covers the 2 dot points there. Part of how we would envision that would happen would be expanding the number of gatherings during a COP for a couple of reasons. First of all, we had 2 gatherings, both happened during the first week. So if you want to take it from a news reporting perspective, we covered the first week, but not the second. And so by increasing the number of gatherings, we're hoping maybe to increase that up to 4. That would enable us to cover 2 weeks. It would also enable us to have a broader diversity of gatherings, because the first gathering was more of a general gathering. The second one, because of the international partner, which was Virtual Blue COP 25, tended to be more focused on ocean issues. And I could see a youth gathering, a faith gathering, a frontline communities gathering, et cetera. One of the folks I've been in conversation with about this is the local president for the NAACP, who is really supportive of climate justice. And I talked with him about involvement for next year for this coming COP, and he was definitely interested. One of the things I wanted to plug in down here, actually, let me go on to the next slide, and then I'll plug these last comments in. So one of the issues that we're also looking at, and part of the issue came up because during our second gathering, there was a participant who came up and said, I'm from Denver, how could we get this happening in our neck of the woods? And I said, great, go for it. I wasn't going to volunteer to help organize it, but I was certainly willing to encourage her to go for it. And so that we're looking at at least the possibility of one other community doing this. And so one of our big issues here is how do we go about, and this is what I'm hoping for our discussion that will follow after I say a few more words and then shut up. One of the big issues is how do we go about identifying and encouraging other communities to do the same thing? One thing that Niraj and I've talked about and we're in the process of doing is to produce an organizing kit based on the PDX experience that could then go out to other places interested in doing this. Being part of an RCE network or a Regional Center for Expertise network around the world, that would be a logical conduit to be able to start encouraging this. And another big issue that we're going to be definitely on the prowl for is identifying observer groups as well as UNF's CCC staff who could be resource people for communities establishing their own bridges. And particularly with the UNF CCC staff, there's a couple of issues that are involved there. One of which is, how do we stay in the pipeline in terms of what the plans are? So one thing that's one object lesson about organizing a virtual bridge is it is a real challenge given the fact that you're dealing with the UN, which is this huge bureaucratic organization that is constantly shifting to respond to crisis situations. I mean, the one we had for 25 was the fact that the whole venue got moved in the space of a week. and so it's very difficult to get information from UNF CCC. And one of the other issues, I mean, if in the best of all possible worlds, it would be nice if UNF CCC Secretariat actually had a group within their structure that would go about providing information and encouraging these virtual bridges.
Yeah. So Frank, may I add now?
Sure.
To this? Yeah.
Go for it.
So a couple of things I'm seeing on the chat, and I would like to respond to those and also mention, continue with what Frank had already mentioned. So Frank did mention about the interest in Denver, the community college professor who was with us visiting. One of the things what Frank already mentioned, that we are getting together to prepare a kit based on our experience, what other people can use. I want to draw your attention to the original, during the introduction, Frank mentioned about 170 regional centers of expertises like Gibson that are around the world. So we had it was a youth conference last month where the youth, the RCE network, that were the youth network, they're very interested to host, local bridges within the US. So this was a North America conference of youth for RCEs. So one thing is this tool or this reference book, that reference document that we are going to prepare will be useful for anyone, including those people in the RCAs. It's usually youth, include student networks that are trying to host virtual bridges through universities. That's one thing we can see coming out of this. The other thing, a couple of, I think I saw someone mention intergenerational and trying to have an intentional indigenous involvement. These are great points, and these are something we try to consciously incorporate in our work here. But like we mentioned, we didn't have a whole lot of time. We were really cutting through, trying to get the venues organized and stuff. So this is something we will be doing intentionally for the following COP, virtual COP. And the other thing is also including business people. As you know, we are based out of Portland, and we have businesses such as Nike, which is headquartered here, and a few, I mean, there are a lot of sustainability mindset businesses, which you are going to find a list if you go to the B Corp list in PDX. That said, the other thing that we have been thinking through the organizing committee is to reach out purposefully to engage business folks into this conversation early on, so they're actually present with us in these meetings. This is something we could have done last time, but I mean, like I said, it keeps coming back to us not having had enough time last time, but we were really wanting this thing to launch. So we have one story to start, we have a foundation set, and then we have some experience, and take that and really go forward for the next event. So we will be keeping all these suggestions in mind as we go towards the next. The other one, someone also mentioned Italy in the chat, and I wanted to just reaffirm that Frank and I had a chat with a colleague, a friend from the past for me, and a colleague who is working at Italy headquarters. And Italy, one of the things she suggested was to reach out to the city of Portland and try to see engagement, bring the city into this as an active participant. So this is something that we have started pursuing already. And if you have suggestions towards how we can do better on that, that would be useful. And any other guidance that comes from your experience to take this and make it more effective at a local level and be able to replicate elsewhere. I'm reading the chats and I can see Washington State, local government. This is all great. I mean, it's really great if we can find ways to network. And when this next COP happens, which will be in 2021, my feeling is like what Frank mentioned now. The virtual thing is going to become a big thing, and that's the reality for multiple reasons already Frank mentioned. So I think being prepared for that space, and all of us being together and having a plan, or like what are the purposes of these local bridges, and each local bridge may have their own defined purpose depending on where they are coming from. What are their economic situations, social situations? What if it is a city that's sitting right next to the ocean? That their realities are different from PDX realities, right? And so we define the purposes of these bridges and who should be the partners, define partners in those local areas, and how do we measure the achievements of these local bridges? Yes, we have a Talanoa dialog publication, but what do you do with that Talanoa dialog publication, right? There are really great ideas in that. People have suggested ideas. How do we take that? And that's where the UNFCCC connection comes. And that's we have to figure that out, I think.
I'm going to pause the conversation for a second. Do you want to go to some broader questions from folks? Because we have about 10 or 15 minutes.
I would. I definitely would.
Let's do that. If I can ask for people with questions to use the hand raising move. Wow, Frank, that was fast. He obviously knows where the hand raising move is. So it's in your participants. So we'll start with Frank, and when the rest of you figure out your little hand waving thing, we'll grab to you. Okay, go ahead, Frank.
It's at the bottom of the participant list, by the way. It's been there. I raised my hand a while ago. So thank you very much for this engagement today. The question I have has to do with the structure. So when you talk about engaging the UNFCCC staff, the one actor that I wasn't clear that you were engaging were the country negotiators. Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about staff, that's one thing, but when you're talking about the parties, and the parties, there's a whole delegation. I was part of the US delegation to COP21, and it was a massive delegation, but the people, I would think one of the parts of the architecture that you bring to this table is the ability for a country or communities in countries to engage their negotiators, their national team that are in these dialogues. Does that line up with you and what you were thinking aspirationally?
Actually, you know, one thing about that is when we were at 24, I noticed that right up there in the negotiator's office, we're still in, had a presence there too.
Right.
And my tendency at this particular time, given what I'd heard through the grapevine about what was happening with the U.S. Delegation at that point, would be to try to tap into folks like that.
Sure. So I mean, the under the current architecture and administration priorities and all that stuff, totally understand. But going forward, I mean, COP21. I'm sorry, the COP in 21, which is COP 26, is sorry, we're a little off. Is going to be potentially under a new administration, and so those negotiators are going to be under. I appreciate that, but they're going to be under different, you know, guidance, and so. But what I've always found is the negotiators are a bit tricky to engage. So I'm just wondering if that was part of your aspiration, and that would, you know, this model doesn't only work in the United States context. This is a bigger model than just the United States.
Well, it sounds like as we get to the bridge for 26, Frank, you and I need to have a conversation about how to tap into some of these folks.
Agreed.
Okay, we have then Ginger and then James.
Okay, so hi, I'm kind of new to this. Frank, I've met at the National Association for Environmental Education, and I'm a local CCL volunteer and also do climate, just communications and public engagement. My real job is with Hanford Cleanup, actually a nuclear site. And because of my public engagement ties, I'm in totally different circles. I see a lot of missed opportunities to connect. And so I would love to continue, you know, hook in with you guys and help you plan. I'm over in Eastern Washington, but if Portland is leading, you know, how can we expand that? And just like through my engagement channels, seeing like which cities have great sustainability programs that have really no formal environmental education background, or maybe nobody on their staff who has formal climate change training, but their city has made a commitment to educating the public or whatever. So they're just pulling stuff off the internet. How do we get, you know, the Salt Lakes and the Lakewood, Colorados and the, you know, other cities? And then the other thing I had said about trying to curate the gathering somehow. And if we could figure out ahead of time how to, you know, maybe pre-register people that have an interest in a gathering and get their address or their zip code and what sector they affiliate themselves with, so that we could try to set up intentional meetups where you have a really diverse group of people. And it's not just the kids all hanging out together or the business people or the faith community. It's like cherry picking and getting them all in the same room because they're not hearing each other. And, you know, I've got my lead climate guy, I think he contributed to the first IPCC report, Steve Gann out of Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. And I talked about climate justice and he's like, well, I don't think people really care about that here in Eastern Washington. It's very red. And it's like, I don't care whether they care about it. They need to hear it. It needs to be part of the dialogue. And so, and it's not that Steve doesn't care about people. He's just worried about how other people will perceive it. And so we need to break down. I'm really worried that we're not breaking down those kinds of barriers and attitudes. And that's why I think we, you know, I'm happy to help figure out, you know, if we've got a couple of years to plan, how do we calculate getting these people together that need to be in the same room at the same time. So,
well, you've got an awful lot to respond to there, and I'm not going to try to respond to all of it given the limited amount of time, but that the last part that you were talking about there in terms of how do we get everybody in the same room, I mean, that's precisely the issue here. And I mean, that's been my experience with the COPs the few times I've gone, is an incredible diversity of people. And it's, and somehow being able to broaden that out to the rest of the planet, I think is critical at this juncture.
Mm-hmm. And Frank, like just before we transition to James' question, I think one of the key points of doing this, I know that many of us have been thinking about this across different spaces, is how do we do that in local ways that are visions of how it can be done? And it seems like that's what your work is showing. And then how do we use that as an example for broader things? And that kind of guidelines document that you're talking about would be really critical to being able to replicate that in other locations. Super, super interesting. Can we go to James? He's had his hand up for a bit for his question.
Okay. I think that in my work with business leaders, I often get shunted aside to sustainability coordinators, you know, in a firm or that sort of thing. And it's really hard to get to the top people who really make the decisions. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about the business leader involvement. How do they find the time? How do they get along with the others that are on these sessions? And how do you find them to begin with? Thank you.
You've had more experience with that than I have, Naraja, so go for it. You mute it.
Okay, James, thank you for that question. I want to just say a good start for us in Gibson was in our last symposium in 2019, we identified a couple of business leaders to give away our sustainability awards. So that was, we did a bunch of open call for our community and said, who do you identify as business leaders that are spearheading sustainability innovations, or bringing the message of sustainability into our communities, right? So we had that story. We have identified a few of those people through our first call in 2019, and I believe our symposium was sometime in April or prior to that. So what we did was taking that step of further next step, as in going into their business and actually interviewing them, right, understanding better what are the practices they do. And we contextualize this in context of the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals that the UN has, and climate change is goal 13 out of that. So what I'm trying to tell you is the process is set, as in we have a way of identifying businesses through open calls to the community through our newsletter. That's one way. The other one is, like I mentioned a couple of minutes earlier, was using the B Corp, the community itself. So there is a business community which is called the B Corp PDX, and these guys are a list of all the businesses here in Oregon, and you can look by zip and find the ones that are located in Portland area and start contacting them, which is just go one by one and start contacting them, or go into their meetings, the host, when they host their conferences and stuff, and hobnob and find your network there. That's the other way. And we, for the next COP, which is going to which we are planning for, Frank, I myself and the rest of us here, is to have a plan exactly, as in these are the things we are looking for in a business to onboard with us, and reach out to them and say, okay, we are looking at you because we find these things that you're doing as innovation in regards to climate change very, very novel, and we want you to be part of this process because we want to bring your story here, right? So that's one way of engagement that we are foreseeing, and I think we'll come out with more as we go. Did that answer your question, James?
It does. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Deb, I imagine we're wrapping it up at this point.